Hello, hello, hello. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the All of Us Black History Month discussion for February 20th, the fight for education. I'm so glad to have y'all here tonight. My name is Jamaica Miles, co founder, executive director of All of Us. Joining us this evening is Jasmine Gripper. If you don't know, you should already know. I'm very proud that I've known Jasmine for more than 12 years at this point. And I'm going to pass it over to Jasmine just to introduce herself to everyone that's here this evening.
Yeah, Jamaica, thank you for inviting me. Always happy to share space with you and all of us. My name is Jasmine Gripper. I am currently the co-director of the New York State Working Families Party. And Jamaica and I first interacted in my previous role at the Alliance for Quality Education, which is a statewide organizing group fighting for educational justice, where I spent more than 10 years. And so happy to be here and still fighting just with a new hat and building more power for our community and our people and for the fights that we need to win.
Absolutely. And as this is Black History Month and we're talking about the fight for education, if you would give folks just a little flair of what your journey has been like. I know the story, but share with everyone else what has it looked like for you in the realm of education?
Yeah, I went to elementary school in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn in the early 90s, and it was the best. I went to this all black school where my principal was a black woman with a PhD. And when she was retired, she was followed by another black woman with a PhD. And all my teachers were essentially black women who looked like me, who loved on me. It was a community school. It felt like a family. I was at school all day, all night. We had a music teacher who taught us songs like I love myself the way I am. There's nothing I need to change. It was just a beautiful love bubble of like blackness, black excellence. Um, and it really just like shielded me from the world. And I like just didn't know of a space where it wasn't this loving environment where the teachers deeply cared about me, where they knew my family, they knew who my brothers were. My mom was like coached into being like the PTA president, like another parent had welcomed her and taught her how to like lead in that space. And so that was where I started my educational journey. And it's probably where I kind of maybe committed to becoming a teacher because I was like, I want to do that. Um, but my high school experience was not like that. I went to high school in Queens, and I went to a school with a metal detector. And so for 4 years, every day of my life, I had to go through a metal detector. And what I'll say about this is like, one, when you're in a building every day for 4 years, you know your building. The kids know the building. We all knew if you wanted to get in past the metal detectors, you could just go to the back door. And there were plenty of times where, like, with the metal detectors, what they would do is like you had to be at school by 7:20, and by 7:26 or something, or by 7:30, they would lock the doors and they wouldn't open it until the next period. But if I had gotten out of my bed at the crack of dawn, left my house when the streetlights were still on, and they locked that door when I get up that hill, I'd be like, no, I'm going to class. And so I would go around to the back door and like just go to class. I was like, what are you, by the time you call a security guard, I'm in my classroom and you wouldn't be able to identify me.
Yeah.
So one, like metal detectors don't work. It's just really like if you ask me now, like going into the Capitol, I know how to go through a metal detector quickly. And I felt like my school did more to prepare me for scanning and what that is like than it did to prepare me for college and careers. And just like how just dehumanizing it is to have to do that on a regular basis at the place you go that is like your home, right? Your school is your home away from home in many cases. And it didn't feel like a home. It didn't feel nurturing. It didn't feel encouraging. It felt very intrusive and like people yelling at you every morning. And so definitely the opposite of what I experienced in my elementary school, my school life.
And part of that journey, from the past to the present to the future, is what we're going to talk about tonight. And let's start with some words from Angela Davis, right? I'm sure that folks are familiar with that name and hopefully appreciate what it means to hear from her as she's speaking about education. So I'm going to share my screen, make sure that folks can see and hear. Um, Just a few words, just a few moments of Angela Davis.
Is that as long as education is perceived as a commodity that some people can purchase and others cannot afford, the value of acquiring that discipline that allows us to understand ourselves, our communities, our worlds, is seriously demeaned. So when Bill Cosby expresses revulsion at the widespread illiteracy in our communities, he seems to forget, I think, that as important as individual responsibility may be, it cannot change the social barriers that prohibit entire communities from acquiring the values that prioritize education. And so what does it mean to prioritize education when schools in poor Black communities resemble juvenile detention facilities or prisons much more than they resemble places designed to encourage the love of learning? Like Bill Cosby, I am appalled at the state of illiteracy in our communities. But I also know that there are many levels of accountability. Yes, there is individual accountability, but there's also community responsibility. There's also corporate responsibility. There's also governmental responsibility. So as we celebrate the 50th anniversary of Brown v. Board of Education, we are compelled to recognize, it seems to me, that the promise of educational equality, indeed the promise of racial equality in the broader sense, has not been fulfilled. As a matter of fact, today, northern schools are even more segregated than southern schools. But what do we do with this information?
What do we do with this information indeed, right? And again, this was like 2 minutes of Angela Davis talking about education back in 2004, right? 20 years ago, having this conversation. Jasmine, here we are 20 years later from Angela Davis talking about the 50-year anniversary of Brown versus the Board of Education. Why is that court decision still so important today, as well as the events that led up to it?
Yeah, so Brown v. Board was about acknowledging that our schools were separate and unequal. And I think people only want to focus on the separate part and not the unequal part. And what I mean by that is like there's been an overemphasis on moving Black children and Black bodies to white schools, as if, you know, Black children sitting next to white kids will get smarter by the process of osmosis, right? Like that is not what happens. The reason why those schools were even desirable in some level to some parents was because of the resources. And parents were looking for well-resourced classrooms for their child. And with well-resourced classrooms, you get better educational outcomes and you get more opportunities to reach your full potential. And so really, it's not about the integration of bodies as much as it's about the equitable distribution of resources, which we are still failing to do to this day, that a school that is mostly students of color is likely to be underfunded by our system. We literally have built-in inequality in our school funding system, right? So we fund schools at the most basic level through property taxes, right? That is the first place schools go to get their funding. And so if you are in a poor neighborhood where the homes have a depreciated value, you can put a 10%, 20%, 30% tax on those homes. You're not yielding a lot of money because those homes and those homeowners don't have much to give to those schools. if you then take a school, a home in a wealthy community where the homes are worth $500,000, $1 million, and you put a small tax on those homes, you are able to yield lots of money. And so there's built-in inequality. And we have accepted that as the foundation of how we fund schools. And we expect, what we have decided as our equalizer is the state and federal government should come in and support those low-income communities. But the federal government has consistently fallen short of its responsibilities, and our state government, even in blue states like New York, have fallen short of our responsibility to educate our children. And so what persists more than ever is the resource gap. Our schools are severely unequal. Like, I remember at one point at AQE, we did a statewide tour and we went to schools all across the state. And we didn't just go to the schools in Black neighborhoods and poor schools. And I remember going to Schenectady, specifically Jamaica, and we talked to the librarian and she was like, yeah, I'm split between two schools. I see these kids twice a week at best. And what they're missing out on, like, and they have to share computers and they're not getting literacy in terms of computers and research and all that they were missing out on. And I just remember like my heart breaking. And then I went to like a Westchester school in a wealthy community. And I think I was floored by how much they had, because even I never had access to those resources as a child. They were like, they had music, but under music was like band, brass band, jazz band, instrumental music, string instrument. I was like, what is this? Under their sports column was like spring sports, winter sports, summer sports. I was like, I didn't know you could have this many choices. And the opportunity, so like people often talk about the achievement gap with no like mentioning of the opportunity gap. When you rob resources from our schools, you limit the opportunities that our kids have, right? I didn't have the opportunity to take brass band or jazz band. Like, I was never even afforded those options. And we are denying our kids lots of opportunities by under-resourcing our schools. And so I think I want to just emphasize, like, separate and unequal is like, yes, it's separate. At this point, if you think about our communities now, if you're in a majority where the public schools are majority students of color, which exist in some communities, even New York City, the public schools are now majority students of color. We're not asking you to move the students of color around to pepper us with the white students. That is like, doesn't even make sense. What we want is resources, and that a school, whether the kids are majority Black or majority white, have the same resources or have the resources they need. And that means that if the poor Black school needs more resources, it's getting it. And unfortunately, what we have is that reality is that our wealthy districts are outspending our poor districts by about $10,000 per pupil. That means wealthy schools are spending upwards in New York, $30,000 per kid. The most advantaged students are getting $30,000 per kid. And the outcome of that is 90% of those kids graduate on time, and majority of them go on to four-year colleges. And then you have our low-income schools that are spending somewhere between $14,000 and $20,000 per pupil. This is a high-cost state. It's New York. But that's not, it's still less than. The kids who need more are still getting less. And therefore, we have the opportunities we have. And so it's multi-layered. And I think people have only got stuck into like busing kids and moving bodies. And it's like, we can leave us alone. Like, I was happy in my all Black school. I did not want to be integrated. What I just needed was resources, right? Like newer books, newer textbooks, and technology. Those were the things that was needed. It wasn't necessarily, and I'm not against well-resourced kids. Learning from kids from different backgrounds is important, but I think we have a really limited view on integration, right? We just think about color. And what about integration based on economic status? Like, those things matter. And bringing people together of different backgrounds, and not just like this really narrow view of like, if we put some Black kids next to some white kids, all of a sudden they're going to learn better. Like, that is not what happens. People learn better when they have opportunities and resources, and that's the most important thing to stress.
And that's the entire show. I'm just kidding. But it really is like all of the pieces, right? Because it is all of these different layers that we have been facing since the inception of this country, that inequity of resources, or not even thinking, oh, they should have books or that they need books. And what that looks like, and the work that you and I did together for, about 10 years or so, included that fight for Schenectady, very specifically that fight for Schenectady and standing up and saying Schenectady, which is a majority students of color district. And at the time when you and I first met 12 years ago, we were owed about $60 million. That's a $60 million. And what we saw is that as we started to fight, as we started to show up for lobby days, as we made our voices heard, teachers, parents, students, admin, we got more money. It still wasn't the full foundation aid, which, you know, we'll talk about real quick. But the more money we received, the more programs we were able to have. We increased our social workers, our counselors, our wraparound services. And you know what happened? Our graduation rate went up. Our suspension rate went down. And that happened year after year after year, until, you know, I sued the governor, Andrew Cuomo at the time, and said, show me the money, give me the check. It's not okay for you to continue to deny our children. And doing that work while at the same time we were still in those streets all across New York State. Parents, students, teachers all across New York saying all of us deserve to be fully funded. And Kathy Hochul came in and said, I concede the case. We'll give Schenectady the money. But we can't just give Schenectady the money. We're going to have to give the $4.2 billion to all of the public schools. And that was based on the foundation aid formula that AQE fought for even before then, right? Because you talked about the idea that schools will be funded on property taxes and how that's inequitable. Can you talk a little bit about the foundation aid that helps us, right? Helps us to level the playing field, or is supposed to, so those disadvantaged school districts can actually get the money they need to educate children?
Yeah, so basically, almost every state in the US has had a monumental school funding lawsuit where we have used the advocacy through the courts to demand that our states' governments do better, right? That education is a state responsibility. It is in our state constitution. And New York State Constitution says every kid should have access to a sound basic education. And so first in the lawsuit, we had to define what is sound basic education. We had one judge, a lower court judge, say, we just had to educate kids up to middle school. And that was all the state was responsible for. Gratefully, that was thrown out. And the state was like, no, we have to do a meaningful high school education so that we can participate at least in our civic process, right? So that we can all be voters and we can all engage. We can all serve on a jury and know what we have to do. And that's a sound basic education. And so parents, it originally started with parents from New York City, but we realized it's not just a New York City problem, it's a statewide parent problem. But parents sued the state and said, you know what, the state is not fulfilling its responsibility, it's not funding our schools. And what New York was notorious for doing was like giving out school funding by political deals. They were like, oh, you have a tough reelection, we're going to give your schools some money. You're safe, we're going to leave you alone. You pissed us off, you made a political decision we didn't like, we're going to punish you and your schools. And New York was like using like 14 different formulas to just like match what their political dynamics were. They were like, I want to give you more money, let's craft a formula that does that. I want to give you less money, let's craft a formula that does that. And so hence the lawsuit was like, New York, we could do better. Parents won the lawsuit. The state said, you know what, you're right. This is inequitable. We need to do better. And we need to fix not just for New York City, but statewide. And the state crafted what we call the foundation aid formula, which is the majority of school aid is delivered through that. And the state said, you need to phase in this formula, fully funded over the next 4 years. This was decades ago, y'all. When we won the lawsuit, I think it was the 90s. I apologize, I'm blanking on the exact year, where we finally won the lawsuit. We got 2 years worth of the money, and then the Great Recession happened, like the worldwide financial recession. And what New York decided to do under the leadership of Andrew Cuomo, and I'm saying this because he's trying to make a political comeback, and we need to make sure we know our truth about this man. What Andrew Cuomo said was like, we're going to balance the budget on the backs of children. We're going to borrow money from schools. And he made a cutting formula, and everything we had won through that lawsuit, he took away and like cut our schools. And we have been clawing back for that money ever since. And then new lawsuits happened, right? The lawsuit Jamaica was a part of. And parents just kept suing, kept coming to Albany, kept fighting the state. it wasn't until Cuomo was at his lowest that he finally was like, all right, maybe if I fund the schools, I can stay in political power. And then Kathy Hochul agreed. And it wasn't until literally this school year that we're in right now. This is the first time that New York is fully funding its own school funding formula. And now we're funding it after one, a global pandemic that devastated New York and devastated our schools. And two, the formula hasn't been updated. And so the formula is good. I want to name that. I don't think the formula is bad. I think we would describe it as it has good bones. But there are pieces of the formula that need to absolutely be updated. And so, for example, the formula relies on census data. Now, we do a census every 10 years. It's 2024. The funding formula uses the 2000 census. So 2 censuses ago, over 20 years is the data that goes into the formula. We absolutely need to use more current data. The floor of poverty in the formula doesn't quite equate to how just poor some communities really are. And then the weight for English language learners should likely be upped. And so what we want is school finance experts to review our formula and make it better. And so I want to be clear, the formula is good. I'm grateful that New York is finally fully funding it. I will say this governor right now is attempting to renege on her promise 1 year after finally, after decades of fighting, of 1 year getting to the full amount. She's already proposing a budget where she's rolling back her commitment in the foundation aid formula. And so we're literally in Albany fighting her for that right now to get that money put back in the budget. And I believe the state Senate and Assembly are going to get there, but we should pressure them to do so. But we have a formula that is as close to equity as we have right now. It could be better. We want it to be better. But I just want to name that it took years of advocacy of parents and communities all across the state holding our governor and our state elected officials accountable to win it. And they refused to do it. And I think the other part was about the year we won it. The other thing we did was we increased taxes on the ultra rich. So I want to name that. We found the revenue by making millionaires, not me and you. I'm going to be clear about that. It was people who make 25 million income. That was their income per year. Yeah. A small tax increase on them yielded us the money we needed to fund our schools. And that was how we were able to win our increase in education funding that thanks to Jamaica, thanks to so many parents and community members, we were able to bring home for our children.
Because this is what we do, right? We're talking about the fight for education during Black History Month. It is something that we have been fighting for, that we continue to fight for, and it takes all of us, pun intended, to achieve those goals, to ensure that every child has a quality education. As a reminder, listen, we're talking about a lot and more's to come. If you have questions, thoughts, ideas, if you don't want to lose your thought, feel free to drop it into the chat. We'll get to you later, and also open it up for a community conversation. In the video that we just watched with Angela Davis, as we're talking now about resources and how they're spent, that is another topic that comes up, right? Especially as it relates to our Black schools, our majority schools of color. And sometimes the decision about how those monies are spent relates to safety. I know Angela Davis has a particular view about what that should be and what that looks like here in New York, as well as in other schools across the country. Can you talk about, the history of safety and who has it been safe for, and what does that look like, or what should it look like? Not that I'm leading at all.
Yeah, no, the safety conversation just annoys me. And so how it started years ago is when the school, this is sad for our country, but when the school shootings first started happening, the Columbines, and the first time that happened, the knee-jerk reaction was metal detectors need to go in schools. But there was this disillusion that these were happening in white suburban schools, and they didn't get the metal detectors. It was used as an excuse to put metal detectors and police in Black and brown schools. And that was what they were doing for years. And these shootings kept happening, or the shootings and massacres were happening in white suburban schools, and they kept adding police and metal detectors to Black urban schools. And another thing about that was this is when you're fighting for resources. We're oh, we want money for counselors. We want money for new textbooks. We want money for technology. And I can't get that. But money for cops and for a metal detector, you will pay for. And it's such a slap in the face to our people, our kids, when we say you're not worth the books and the educational technology, but this policing you, we will absolutely spend abundantly on that. And we noticed that, right? I think our kids and our community, so I say, like, we went to these underfunded, crumbling schools, but you will send us to a state-of-the-art penitentiary. And like, how we spend our resources matter. And for too long, this country has allowed the policing infrastructure to have bloated budgets while robbing our kids of the resources necessary for schooling. I remember at AQB, we did a report about schools, not jails. And we pointed out that at one point, New York City was spending $100,000 per person housed in Rikers Island. Now, Rikers is pre-trial, right? Like, you have not even been convicted of anything. We will spend $100,000 per bed to hold you pre-trial, but at no point in your educational career, from childcare to college, will we invest $100,000 on you learning and growing? Like, that is absolutely absurd. And we see that all the time in our prisons, our jails. We will spend abundantly and like not put the same investment on the front end. It's like, well, if you spend on the front end, you won't have to spend later, right? Like, have our kids have something productive to do. Let's not focus on incarcerating them. And so that was a deep frustration. Like, like, I went to school with metal detectors and police officers. Why? I did not need that in my school. I could have used more guidance counselors. I could have used more textbooks. I could have used updated technology. And these were the things that were missing. And so it's such a slap in the face to our children when we are willing to spend abundantly on the things to police them, on ways to make them feel less than, and we won't spend that same amount of money or even a fraction of it on the things that actually support their learning. We even had a report at one point that New York City had more police officers and guidance counselors and nurses combined. We're like, what is this? You are literally telling our kids you would rather lock them up than provide them a nurse, right? Like, when we have kids that have asthma in so many of our schools and we can't have nurses. And so that is the constant thing we're fighting for, is like, not only do we want resources, but we want them spent well. I remember there was a bond school act that was for technology, and there was a school district in the Hudson Valley, and they were going to bulletproof the foyer. And it was like in the middle of the pandemic where kids still didn't have computers and internet. And we were like, what are you doing? Like, why are you bulletproof floors and doors? Like, we don't need that. And I think the other part is like safety. What makes kids feel safe is feeling seen, feeling heard, and feeling valued. And so when we see the shootings that happen in schools, who's doing that? Kids who don't feel seen, who don't feel heard, who don't feel valued. And so the police officers to be there to respond aren't helpful. We saw that in the Texas shooting. The police officers were there and they didn't help. What we need on the front end is counselors for our kids. We want our kids to feel supported. And that is literally the only thing that works in terms of making our schools safer, is having a holistic environment where our schools really feel like a community. And when kids have an adult they can talk to, that they have a relationship with. And those are the things we feel reluctant to invest in. It is not police. They do not make our kids, and especially for our communities, like for our immigrant communities, where policing and your status is uncertain, or your family status may not be like you here legally. Police do not make you feel safe. They make you feel threatened. Same if police are harassing you in the community and then you come to school and you see them, that does not make you feel safer. It makes you feel threatened. And so we really have to, like, one, police do not equal safety. And let's be clear about that for many people in our communities. And two, what makes our schools a safe environment is a loving culture. Like that, what I described at my elementary school, that was safe. Like we all loved being there. Every person loved being there. Parents were welcome in that school. It was a beautiful space. And when you invest in the front end on creating a loving community in a school, you will have the safety outcomes. When you invest in police, the statistics is, for when you add police officers in schools, the only guaranteed outcome is more students will be arrested. Every research study has said this. It doesn't reduce violent incidents in the school. It doesn't reduce fights in the schools. It doesn't prevent anything. The only thing you are guaranteed to do when you put police in your schools is increase the number of children arrested. And we've seen those videos, right, of 6-year-olds in handcuffs. What the heck? This kid is having a tantrum and we put handcuffs on them. That is not appropriate. And so we need a better response. And we actually know it works. I just want to be clear. I think this is the part that frustrates me. We're like, oh, we don't know what works in schools. We know it works.
Yes,
a loving community, a loving environment is what works. It's just we refuse to invest in that. And I think it's really important that safety is not police. safety is care, and is loving people in our school communities, and our children deserve that, and they deserve to be treated like children who are loved and cared for, and where school can feel like a second home.
And this is like seen anecdotally here in the capital region as well. For folks that have joined late, welcome to this discussion about the fight for education during Black History Month with Jasmine Gripper. In Schenectady, as we increased the money that we received, we invested in counselors and wraparound services. We worked on the community school model. We removed SROs from our buildings. We went 10 years without having a cop in our schools. And during that time, we watched suspension rates go down. We watched graduation rates go up. We saw the disparity, right? Because it's not just the suspension. It is also the fact that Black and children and other children of color are suspended at higher rates than their white counterparts. So currently in Schenectady, Black students are suspended at 2 times or more than their white counterparts. And that's an increase. And that increase happened after cops were put back in our schools. After 10 years, we didn't have any police in our schools. And right now we have a CEO program that partners with the Schenectady Police Department, where there are officers specifically at the high school, but also for our middle schools and elementary schools. And it is also a cost, right? How are we deciding to spend that money? And what we often don't recognize is the importance of parents and students paying attention to budgets. Right now, here in the upstate New York area, if you are in the capital region, budget talks are happening. Schenectady City School District right now is part of its budget talks. For those that don't know, I am an elected school board member. I am part of those discussions. If you have ideas for whatever school district you're in, please show up to a school board meeting. Go to the school district website, find out when the meeting is, go speak during public comment, and let them know. We have been fortunate for the last few years to have parents come and speak on a multitude of issues. The last public school board meeting we had, a student came in and was quite upset. He said, "I hear that you're talking about metal detectors, and it already feels like a prison." He didn't want it. He spoke out against it. And this was a student. As a matter of fact, during the time that discussions were happening about putting police in our schools, hundreds of students walked out in protest. I don't even know how many came meeting after meeting after meeting and spoke at the board meetings to say they didn't want cops in their schools. Unfortunately, the vote 4-3, and that contract happened. But the idea of being engaged and being involved, which is definitely a theme that we have this evening, whether it's the past, right? How we got to a space where we could have money in our schools, or if it's the present and we want to make sure that we don't have police officers or metal detectors in our schools. It has involved people standing up and speaking out. So as we're in this moment right now, Jasmine, what are some of the topics, right? We already talked about, police in our schools and metal detectors. What else is being discussed about what's happening in our schools, what should be happening in our schools? What are the issues that folks are talking about, especially here in New York?
Yeah, I'm gonna go to like the hot button topic, which is like books and culturally responsive education. And this is interesting. A lot of us in the advocacy community have been fighting for culturally responsive education for years. And it was really good. NYU had worked with community groups to do a survey where you can actually request a curriculum from your school. Parents could. It was really parent friendly. And then you could read the curriculum and you can rate it from culturally responsive to culturally destructive. And what we found was like most curriculums that our schools were using were culturally destructive. You were more likely to read about a dog and a cat or an animal than to see a book where a person of color was reflected. And so we had been fighting for like more diversity in our school libraries. We had been fighting for more like our history to be taught, and not just in February, but all year round. And there was progress being made. And one of the things I even say about the young people, they were like, wait, why am I learning more about like Black history on TikTok than I'm learning in school? And we're looking at their schools like, y'all need to do better. And then all of a sudden, this Moms for Liberty came out of nowhere. I don't say came out of nowhere. We came from the Tea Party movement. And they saw our schools as a place to attack inclusivity. And they are banning books. And we think, oh, in New York, it does not happen here. I want to say it is on our heels, New York. They are here and they are trying to build momentum. I will say there are many times New York voters have, like, when they were paying attention, have like pushed them out, but they were absolutely running for office all across our state. I remember looking at a website and it was like Save Our Schools, and it was Long Island. I was like, they when I say they co-opted all our terms, it was like
Yep.
equity and this, and I was like, what is this about? And I was like, should we be working with this group? And then finally I dug deeper and I was like, oh, they were like, they were asking to request curriculum, like how we were, but not to see that was culturally responsive. They wanted to make sure there was no mention of race. And so the dog whistle politics of like, why are we talking about race and not talking about outcomes? Like, why can't we see ourselves reflected in our curriculum? There's so much research that shows when kids see themselves reflected in the curriculum that they do better. They engage more with learning. And yet we want to take that out of our classrooms and take that away from our kids. And so that is one of the forefront fights we're in right now, is the fight for our education, the fight to teach truth. There's a whole Teach Truth campaign that many folks on the national level have been putting together. But like this idea that if you are banning books or burning books, you are on the wrong side of history. That is just like you can know you will be on the wrong side of history, and that is what you are doing. Our kids should be exposed to literature. Our kids should be exposed to books. And we need to expose them to the breadth of people and histories and cultures that are out there. And this like really trying to tamper down on culturally responsive education, this backlash that we're in right now. It's a really hard moment, because to the parents who are in the fight on a daily basis, it's hard to be in the fight with those right wing, pretty racist folks on a regular basis.
Yes.
But we have to stay in the fight, and we have to keep fighting for our schools and our curriculums.
Yes, just yes, and plus one to yes, it is very difficult because New York, as was mentioned by Angela Davis, is not like this beacon of hope. Still segregated, right? And that 20 years ago, she talked about how the North was more segregated than the South. And so while we're facing that segregation and racism, our schools have very much become targets. I think that it's fair to say the right sees them as low hanging fruit, to be able to infiltrate and put people on school boards. Locally, we have seen some seriously contested races for school board seats. As a matter of fact, Save Our Schools or Save Our City, or they are often regional, and they created lists during some of the school board races and said, here are the people we want off the seats. Here are the people you should be voting for. They have been very targeted and put in a lot of effort. And unfortunately, school board races have low voter turnout traditionally. And while many of our historically marginalized communities already have low voter turnout, it is even less than that when it comes to school board races. So anyone that's watching, this is why it's important to be civically engaged, to be involved. The fight for education continues, as we're here today talking to Jasmine Gripper, the current co-director for New York Working Families Party, and formerly with Alliance for Quality Education, which I'm so glad that you were there so that I got a chance to meet you and learn so much. Folks have already said in the chat, like, wow, this is a lot of information, and it really is. As a reminder, if you have questions or comments, feel free to drop it in the chat. We will be inviting folks to join this conversation with Jasmine and I. What would you say is needed as we are moving forward, right? We know that safety and security and police officers and metal detectors, curriculum, are some of the things within our schools that we're fighting for, as well as the ongoing fight for adequate resources to be able to educate our children. What are the lessons we learned to help us to keep moving forward? and who is helping us, lead that fight for education right now today?
Yeah, it's a loaded question, Jamaica.
I
I will say their research shows us exactly what we should be doing for our children in our schools, and we're just not doing it. And what I'll say about that is that almost there's no point in history where our government, our leaders did the right thing simply because it was the right thing to do. They did the right thing because there was political pressure on them to move. And so we have to be the ones to build the political pressure to force them to move. Research alone isn't enough. Research helps, it validates our points, but we have to like build the political will to force it into existence. So one of the things I think is absolutely important now and came up a lot during the pandemic is childcare and early childhood education, right? Like we need to make sure from the beginning our babies are taken care of. And we expect so much from parents in terms of work. And yet we provide them so little support during those crucial times. That we know the first 1,000 days of a child's development is essential. It literally sets them up for life. And yet we're just like, oh, figure it out yourself. Hope you can get diapers because we're not helping you with that. Right. And so we really need to set our families up for success. And we need to all be bought in that like children are a collective responsibility, that as a society our kids are our future leaders, our future workforce, they're our community, and it is our responsibility to invest in our children. And so for our youngest learners, from childcare to 3K to pre-K, these things need to be universally available to all parents. The other thing is, the school day ends around 2:30, 3 o'clock. Let's be real, parents work until 5. After school is a thing. Like, why do we not have universal after school programming? That needs to be free, that needs to be available. And so a longer school day, a longer and by school day I don't mean academics. Kids can stop learning and can play. Play is fun and play is learning, right? You learn how to work on a team, in a sports team. You learn how to be a leader as the captain. These are all crucial skills to like a well-rounded education. And so community schools is a good model for that, where like you actually show up in the community for what they need. And the other thing I think somebody had pointed out to me was like for many low income communities, the school building is probably one of the most valuable buildings in that community. Why are we not letting the community access it on a regular basis? So do the young adults want to play basketball at night? Open the gym, let them play basketball at night, right? Like we don't need to close up our schools. Did we pay for that pool in that high school? Then open that pool up so we can go swimming, right? Like we need to use our schools and our school buildings as not just for the school day and the kids, but really open it for the community to meet the needs. And so transformation only happens through advocacy. We all have to get involved, like Jamaica is saying. And I know it's hard. It's so much happening. Local government, state government, federal government. It's so easy to get caught up in the federal government because that's what the news covers. And it covers it so widely. But really what's so important is what's happening on the local level. And so right now, our state government is negotiating our budget in Albany. They will determine if schools will get an increase or how big that increase will be. They're trying to determine if they should give developers money to build housing that we have to beg them to be affordable, right? Like these are things being negotiated in Albany. Like last year's budget, was it last year? They gave $1 billion to the Buffalo Bills for a stadium, right? Like, and I say that to say we live in one of the wealthiest states. Like y'all don't believe that scarcity mindset. This is the wealthiest country, and we live in one of the wealthiest states. When you look at New York, you do not compare New York's economy to another state because it doesn't even match. You compare New York's economy to other countries. That is what we are on par with. New York State and New York City, like big economies. We have money, we have resources. If I'm not mistaken, New York has more billionaires and millionaires on the planet than any other place on earth. Like they live here because this is their playground. They are allowed to have, and we're like, oh, we're a high tax state. You and I pay high taxes. The billionaires have figured out how not to pay taxes and still love and enjoy life in New York. And we need them to pay their share. And that happens through our state government. It can also happen through our federal government. But our state government can pick up the tab while our federal government is in dysfunction and can help and can really invest in our communities. Our local city councils are doing an amazing job and are often on the front lines for what we're encountering in our communities. And then, of course, our school boards are at the heart. It's about free labor for most school board members, long hours, and are dedicated to our children. we need to show up at our school board meetings, and like all those things are so important for the accountability work. And then plugging into organizations, like doing it by yourself is hard. Doing it in a community is much better. So what are the local groups? All of us is a local group. AQE is a statewide group, right? Like plugging into the groups that are deeply connected. Like if I want to know what's happening in Schenectady when I was at AQE, I would talk to Jamaica, right? If Jamaica wanted to know what's happening Albany statewide politics, she could talk to me. But that resource and information sharing was so essential, because then when I went into the Capitol, I was like, well, Schenectady schools don't have this, and Schenectady schools don't have that. And I could like pull from the stories across the state, and also like have our parents from across the state come to the Capitol and share their stories themselves, right? But we have to network. We can't carry this alone. We have to be in relation to each other. And so I love the relationships that often exist in New York. I will say we have a good ecosystem of community groups who are willing to partner and work together for the greater good, because we build power together. We have to build, we say, like the bigger block. And so whether it's the community group at the local level or like the Working Families Party, that's a political party in New York building power. Like when you go to vote, go to row D and vote on the Working Families Party line, right? Like skip Democrat, skip Republican, skip conservative, and vote WFP, right? That is a signal to the power we are building in our state. And not many states have that ability to have a ballot line. We do in New York, and we absolutely need to take advantage of it and use it to express that we don't just want Democrats, we want progressives in office. And there's a complicated, multi-layered strategy the party has for building power. We can talk about that another day, but like it's all us being connected together. The party is labor and community groups working together to build power for New York State, and that's the winning strategy here.
Listen, that conversation actually is next Tuesday. So, for folks that are looking for that conversation about political representation, the history of Blackness in politics, that's going to be next Tuesday, February 27th, as we round out the Black History Month discussion series for all of us, because we do need to cover all of these parts, right? The first thing we talked about was economics, and then we talked about human rights, and here we are talking about education. Next week we're going to talk about the political experience as well as representation. And I know that folks are chomping at the bit to ask us some questions. I appreciate this wealth of knowledge that Jasmine brings, because there is a lot, and it is a lot for us to know, which is another reason why it's important for us to work collectively together. No one of us can be at every meeting, sit on every Zoom, go to the state to have a conversation, be at our school board meeting, and go to work every single day. But when we do work collectively, when we spend that time working with each other, one of us can be at that meeting and then educate all of us about what's happening, so we know when and how to take collective action. So as we get ready to transition to the community conversation portion of this, reminder to folks, if you are on the Zoom with us right now, you can drop a question in the chat. We already have a couple questions. If you would like to come off of mute and ask the question yourself, you can go down to the reactions, click raise your hand. I would love to hear some more voices as a part of this conversation. So is there anyone that would like to join and ask the question themselves? If not, I can absolutely go into the chat to ask questions, because there were a few that came directly to me, right? You don't have to tell everyone what your question is. If you just want to send it to me, that's fine. But also, if you'd be willing to come off of mute and ask your question, that would be appreciated as well, because it takes all voices as we move forward in this fight for education during Black History Month. Anyone interested in asking your own question? I'm so specifically looking at one person.
If you raise your hand using the reactions.
Yeah, yep. There we go. All right. Sean Young.
You already know I always have questions about something, right? I tried to unmute, but anyway. So my question is just around the narrative of police and public safety, or equaling public safety, and how that is so firmly entrenched in the mind of so many people. I was just wondering, like, could you name some reasons why that is and why and what we should be thinking about, what people who aren't necessarily where we are when thinking about police and safety, what they need to be interrogating in their own self about that narrative.
Yeah, that's a good question, Sean. I will say, the first time I heard like defund the police or police free anything, I was like, what is this? I was like, if we got rid of police, what would we replace them with? And I remember the person responding was like, I don't know. We should imagine what that could be. And it left me feeling like uncomfortable and like, like after months or years of like just letting that like sit, and it was like, could we imagine a new possibility? And so I think for many it's like, oh, that kid is acting up, suspension, right? Like the knee jerk reaction I think is often police or punishment. The more thoughtful and careful reaction, and the one that actually works better, is like, well, what's the root cause? Why is that kid being disruptive in the classroom? And if they're being disruptive, is it because they're hungry and they can't focus? And we need to like make sure our kids have food and snacks. Are they like disruptive because like they can't see and like they just never been to the eye doctor before, and we need to make sure they have access to the medical facilities? Are they disruptive because like I was a teacher, and I remember I had a kid who like wild out random, like sometimes he was great and then also he would wild out, and I was like, what is going on? And then finally I had a talk with mom, and I realized my hard days in the classroom were directly after mom and dad had some sort of altercation, and they were going through a divorce, and he just didn't know how to cope, and it turned into him expressing himself in ways that just like were disruptive to the classroom, but that's all he knew as a 6-year-old in first grade. And I remember, like, in response to that, I was like, Mom, do you mind if I ask him to talk to the school social worker? I was like, not trying to penalize you, not to CPS, but like for him to have coping mechanisms. And thankfully, that social worker, who had a full load, took on him as an extra student. And she gave him some practices, like what to do when you're upset, how to manage your anger. And I remember one day he came to me, he was like, can I go to Miss So-and-so's office? Because I'm having a moment. And I was like, you should go. And we went from having like a blow up once a week to like never having them again. And I remember my fear for him was like, at 6, his blow ups were like, oh, kind of cute, little 6-year-old having like a temper tantrum. But I was like, when he becomes bigger than his teacher, this is going to be seen as a threat. But what no one is getting is to the root cause, is that he didn't know how to cope with his anger and he needed help with that. And so I say that to say, like, our knee jerk reaction, because society, because of law and order, propaganda, all those things that like are ingrained in us, that cops are our friend and the cops are the answer, don't really get to that cops actually aren't the answer, and there's something that we should be doing more and better. And I feel like we do this thing where like we're like, oh, schools are failing, we should punish them and take away, and then we're like, crime is on the rise, we should give more cops, and we don't say, well, cops are failing and maybe we need another intervention here. And I just think as a society we have just been trained that this over reliance on cops is just like, and we see it in military, like we just been way too much on it regardless of the outcome. And it is on us to start questioning and thinking of what new possibilities are out there, what new ways of coping are out there, what new solutions are out there. And some of it isn't new. I think back, I was like, did we always have police? When we were living in community with each other, how do we hold each other accountable? Is there another way possible? And so I say that to say, like, when you hear of a disruption, what's your knee-jerk response? And then like stop and think, is there something else we could be doing to intervene here? Because we know cops and just punishment don't work. And that's why we're where we are now. We're now questioning how much we're spending on police and saying we should be spending in other ways, because this is not working and we need to create something better.
It's not working. It's never worked. And like Jasmine said, right? This is just what we've been told we're supposed to do. Oh, well, if there's a problem, let's police our way out of it. Let's incarcerate our way out of it. Let's put people in cages or remove them from community to make it safer, while the data proves that it never keeps us safe. And there are other ways to be safe. I've decided I'm not going to call it alternatives to safety. There is a way to be safe that does not involve policing or the carceral state. And it is about that willingness and how we're able to speak to each other and be in community with each other, especially inside of our schools, right? Jasmine, you talked about it earlier. The environment that our children are in they will rise up to or down to what is expected of them. And if what we expect of them is to be policed and for them to be monitored every single move they make and to be removed if they are disruptive or not following the rules or spoke back to a teacher, then we're not encouraging them to learn. We're just trying to control their movements. I know some other folks had questions in the chat. One that came directly to me. As school board candidates begin to canvass and speak in public settings, because it's school board season, in preparation for elections in May or June, depending on where you are, it's May here in the capital region. What questions are the priority? They also asked if all of us is engaging in any lobbying efforts. So I'll answer that second part if Jasmine, you want to talk about what should school board candidates be talking about while they're out speaking to community members.
Yeah. I mean, one, parent engagement, right? Like our schools are a community. How are you trying to engage parents? How are you creating that parents feel welcomed into the school community and the decision-making process? People are like, oh, parents don't participate. And it's like, again, I went to a school in the hood, Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, and parents were actively engaged. Why? Because the school made it a place where the parents felt welcomed and their opinions were valued. And so, like, are you gonna where are you gonna land on parent engagement, and how are you gonna welcome them in our schools? Resources. You're coming to our school board. Schools get to decide our budget. How are you planning on spending the school's resources wisely? And investing in equity. What are the things that are missing that needs to be there? What are the missed investments? Like, what are things we're investing in that we need to question or shift? And then you have to name. I'm going to name safety, but define safety how you see it. Right? Safety. I believe our kids need help. Our kids, like, we are all, one of those shows, like, we're all not right. The pandemic has all of us have, like, questioning our social skills and our connection to people. For our children, that is even more so. What are we doing to make sure that they are well developed? My plan is for social workers in the school. My plan is for this. So talk about what we could be doing and redefining safety in your talking points. So, like, parent engagement, resources allocation, and then safety as we define it as kids feeling seen, valued, and heard.
Thank you very much for that, Jasmine. As far as all of us involvement in school board races, we do not endorse candidates. That is not our role. Our role is the role that it has been since its inception in February of 2020. Happy anniversary, all of us. Is that we help the community know where to go to vote, where to get information about the candidates, who it is that, if there's a record of how individuals who are incumbents voted on school board elections and how to get that information, how to speak at school board meetings, as well as advocacy moments. If there are parents who are not able to access the school board for any reason, how can we help advocate and lift up their voices? I am currently running for re-election, so I will be one of those people out there talking to folks, but that's what I do anyways, right? It is the role and responsibility of all of us to ensure that we hear from the people on the ground so that the decisions that we make as an organization are reflective of what the people need and offer them access and opportunity to the resources and information for their lives. So it is no different for me any other day. Organizationally, we will continue to be in these streets and sharing information, much like this conversation tonight, making sure folks are aware of where did we start with this fight for education, where are we now, and how do we move forward to ensure that all of our children have a quality education. I do see that Chanima has their hand up, so I'm going to ask you to unmute and please ask your question. You should be able to unmute. There you go.
There you go. You did a great job. You actually kind of converged on part of my question. And I wanted you and the ladies to talk about how somebody someone who is from a background, right, who's been in the educational paradigm that has deprived us of kind of the knowledge of what we're missing out on, how do we kind of include and as a way to empower people into the conversation, how can we line up the ideals and the current situation, our current conditions, so that everybody can easily understand and easily recognize how it impacts their family. You know, how can we include people into the bigger picture and allow everyone to have a lens that can focus and allow them to see clearly how the conditions affect them and how they can be productive in the fight. So talk about that a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you, Chanima.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say one thing about our democracy is that is doesn't it feel like it was never built for all of us to participate. And a lot of those barriers are still in place, whether it's like the time we vote and how we vote to like how we communicate information to people. And so oftentimes people like the government is not, our schools are not always doing a great job of communicating to constituents and voters in parent friendly language, in a way that's easily accessible, and creating conditions where everyone can fully engage. And I think that's where community groups and others have really picked up the ball, which is like, well, if we have a meeting, we're going to offer childcare and we're going to offer food because we know these are essential things that people need. And we're asking you to not be home and come be with us. We're going to at least provide you these things. And so I think it's essential that we create spaces where people can feel welcomed, and we take a little bit of the load off, right? Oh, you have your children, we will have childcare. And you can take a break while you focus on this. Or we're gonna have food, so at least you can eat while you're with us. I think that's part of the issue. I think the other part is like the language people use. And I think this is why people get turned off. They come and they're like, I don't understand what you're talking about. I understand this process. And people refuse to like come to people's levels. And I don't want to say dumb down because I don't think our people are dumb. They're just like, explain to me what the process is, explain to me the ways we can engage. And again, I think oftentimes it's done to dissuade participation, to dissuade engagement. And I think we have to insist on spaces being accessible, insist on spaces being accommodating to us, and insist on creating community welcoming and friendly spaces. And so I think that's on us to advocate for when we see that happening. And then I think the other part is like, don't discount neighbor to neighbor, friend to friend, kitchen table conversations. Like those are so essential. And I think there's a time to listen, right? Like let's hear what other people are saying. And then there's a time to respond and to push and question. I've been at my kitchen table and my brothers have said something off the like, what did you say? And I try to listen and be like, where are you coming from? And I like try to calm down and be like, what's my response in a loving way? Because at the end of the day, he's still my brother. He'll always be my brother. Right. And I think we have to like this idea of like, I will say like cancel culture as like, oh, we just X people out, as opposed to like, how do we actually like talk to somebody once and then talk to them again and then again, and like not to be like nagging, but to keep trying to build with people and not to like leave them behind, but bring our people with us is really essential in growing a movement.
All of that plus one. And, you know, not to be corny, it really takes all of us. So anyone that's on this call right now, anyone that watches this video later, who's someone you know that you want to have a conversation with, or you know someone who has children in the public school, or you have children in the public school, who are the other parents you can talk to and say, hey, did you know the school board elections are coming up? Are you registered to vote? Do you know where to go to vote? Ask the questions of the people that are in your circle. Don't just wait for someone else to come and start the conversation. And also be an active learner. Be responsible for your education. We walk around with computers in our pocket. It's called a phone, right? Hit the Google search. My co-founder says this all the time. You got a computer in your pocket, Google it, search it up, and look for those answers to the questions. If you are on this call right now, you absolutely can reach out to all of us. anyone that registered for this meeting or any of the previous meetings, you'll get follow-up information on how to stay connected to us, how to get additional information, links to the videos that we've watched so that you can continue your own education. I do see that we've got another question in the chat, and Jasmine's ready to answer it already. What does a quality education mean beyond academics? And as a matter of fact, this is something that Angela Davis spoke about as well. So share it with the class, Jasmine.
So a quality education is holistic and well-rounded. I feel like one of the things I saw when I went into some schools was like some kids are being taught to lead and to be future leaders, and some kids are being taught to be followers and to be the future workers. And that is unacceptable. All of our kids should be taught to be thinkers, to be leaders. And so a vibrant classroom isn't silent, isn't people sitting and writing, but it's kids interacting, it's kids thinking, it's kids questioning, it's kids trying something out, it not working and trying again, right? That is real engagement and real learning. And in order for it to be a holistic, realistic education, like it should include science, it should include math, it should include art, it should include music, it should include technology, all of these things that like tap into like what actually is your calling? What is the thing that draws you in? And what are the things you're excited about? I think sometimes we're like, kids should just want to learn. It's like, maybe I just came to school because I know if I go to class, I can go play basketball later, right? Like, and that is okay. And that basketball is way more fun than sitting here reading, but you will read so you can go play basketball. I think like we have to allow that to be. Like sometimes I don't feel like reading either, right? Kids are humans who have feelings, and like sometimes they want to do something and sometimes they don't, and we really have to respect that. But a holistic education is really a chance where kids get to explore. They get to question. I think that's so important. Like you get to question authority, you get to question what's happening around you, and you really get to think and problem solve. And that's real learning. And again, like when you expose kids to the arts and music and technology, all those things really are a holistic, well-rounded education and should be available to all of our children.
And realizing, I would add, that if we create an environment where children are happy to learn, they become lifelong learners, right? Because we should all be, right? None of us should ever feel like, oh, I know everything, I don't need to do this anymore. Oh, well, I graduated from high school, so I'm just going to get a job. I have nothing else to learn. But for us to create an environment where children are hungry for knowledge, for experiences, to learn something new. When I send my children to school, and also my niece, I say to them, learn something new today. I don't say learn something in social studies or science or math. I just say learn something new today, right? There's an opportunity for them to learn something new. And I think that as we are building a future in this fight for education, right now school board races are happening, school budgets are happening. There is an opportunity for every individual in every school district that's running a race right now to say, hey, how are we addressing this so that our children want to be in the building to learn, that they believe that there's something beneficial of learning new things that allows them to fulfill themselves and be their best possible selves. Anyone else have questions? Listen, I know a certain somebody will have questions all day, like won't even hesitate, be like, blah, 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 rapid fire. But if there's anyone that wants to raise their hand and come off mute and ask your question yourself, or if you want to drop it in the chat, I think that I've got everyone who already has dropped in the chat. Again, you could just send it directly to me if you don't want everyone to know your question. Like, that's cool. I'm going to give my shout out to outstanding teachers, and then Jasmine can give hers. So like Jasmine, when I was in elementary school, it was blackety, blackety, black. There were some white teachers, but my principal was black. Me and other students, we knew his kids. We spent the night at their house. My fourth grade teacher, Mrs. Brown, she would go like this. because I would always be talking in class, and I was always talking in class, and so she would just look over her glasses. I stopped talking, but I knew all of my multiplication, and I was happy to be in class. I didn't feel as if she was trying to control my speech because she wanted me to learn, right? And she didn't have to yell at me. She didn't have to kick me out of class. I just knew, oh, she looked at me, I've been talking too much. And I knew she gave me a minute. She, she didn't just cut me off when I was talking to EJ Harris, but she would give me a minute, and then be like, all right, come on, we need to get this work done. And it was this wonderful experience in elementary school. I didn't have another Black teacher for the rest of my education, including when I went to college.
Wow.
So elementary school, shout out to Mr. Acox and to Mrs. Acox, AKA Gail Smith, who was my kindergarten teacher, and she was absolutely amazing. I'm so proud to still have her in my life. But Jasmine, like, who are some of those notables for you, and how did they make you feel that makes them, notable teachers in your life?
Yeah, I mean, I want to just clarify that I went to public school from kindergarten to CUNY, like City College in New York. I went to Hunter College under the City College system. Um, and so I think one of my notables is Miss Hosack was a first grade teacher. She wasn't my first grade teacher, but she taught cheerleading. And she was our cheerleading coach for like all the years. I think even when I was in middle school, I went back to my elementary school for like cheerleading practice or like to help coach for like a year or two. My sixth grade teacher, Miss Williams, was like, she taught us about writing, creative writing, but also like she taught us how to sew. I remember we made dolls, we like decorated these photo albums. It was like one of those like well-rounded classrooms. We did the academics, but she also like had these skills. And I remember, yeah, like we went on trips with our teachers. They would take me home from school, or like school. When I say school was home, school was home. And I remember high school, one of my teachers, it was an older white man, I think it was Mr. Feenley. And I remember one day I got in trouble. I wore a hat. And school rules, you're not supposed to wear a hat in school. And
Yeah.
all day long, I got kicked out of class for not taking off my hat. And I refused to take it off. And my last class was this English teacher. And he was like, Jasmine, can you please take off your hat? You know the rules. And I remember, all day long, I was rebellious. And when he said it, I was like, fine. And I took off my hat. And I sat. But like, it just reminds you, like, it's relationship. The teachers who I had no relationship with, or the teachers who I felt like were yelling at me and being disrespectful, I was like, well, if you want to yell, I can yell too. If you want to be disrespectful, I can be disrespectful too. And like, I rebelled. And when I had this teacher who just was like, Jasmine, please. And like, and he was always this really nice teacher, really nice guy. And I was like, yes, I will take off my hat and fully participate in this English class. And it just shows you relationship. And so those are like my standout teachers. But yeah, I feel like the teachers who I knew listened, who were respectful, who I think saw me for me, was really important. The teachers who compared me to my brothers was deeply annoying. I hated that. Um, but again, I think where school was family and that like, or just like community, that was a safe space. I think the other thing I had in my high school that was really unique was we had like this, I don't know, like a peer space. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like a room where we had like two counselors and we could go there when we had a bad day. We would go there for help. We would like learn to be peer counselors in that space. And I just remember like having a really bad day and going into that space and like one of the teachers in there just like helped me process it and like me feeling better afterwards. And again, so like an adult to talk to, right? Like kids go to kids for advice, but more than likely your
Oh,
friends are giving you, my mom would be like the blind leading the blind. I'm just gonna fall into a ditch, right? Like your friend doesn't know no better than you. Y'all leading each other. And so it's really important is that kids have a trusting adult that they can share their like, not fully developed ideas with. So that someone can help them lead to good conclusions. And so trusting adults are like absolutely the key to kids' success. And like those middle school years where like hormones are raging, our middle school teachers do God's work. We should thank them more. Because I feel like a lot of people shy away from middle school because kids are going through a lot of changes and like are trying to find themselves. And you just got to be patient. It takes a boatload of patience to deal with that. And then our high school teachers, really are the bridge to like where you go next. And I think it's important that teachers, college is great if that's where you want to go. But I think what we have learned is college or careers are like whatever makes you happy, right? And like really, and I don't say that because we're just have to work, but you should feel like you have an opportunity to do something next or to do what you want to do. And we should respect whatever that looks like. And when kids feel like they have no opportunity and no hope is when you really get into a bad situation because then you have nothing to lose. And that's not a good place for kids to be. And so like when they have something to look forward to, whether you go into like engineering, whether you go, my brother is a pastry, or he was a pastry chef and he's still a chef. He never finished college, but like a successful chef. We have to like respect that there are other careers that our kids can go into that are absolutely essential. Like I need a plumber in my house right now. I'm sure my plumber didn't go to college, but he's about to take all my money. Right? Like we gotta respect that these are careers that we can send our kids to. And so like, and then technology is evolving and we can't let it leave our children, our communities behind. And that's really going to be essential that like our kids know the tools of technology, can use them, can navigate them, and have a chance to enter those tech fields as they emerge.
And if our teachers are not engaging, if our children don't feel seen or heard, then it is a missed opportunity for them to share their skill, right? Or their own hidden talents that could emerge. We're just about up on time, but I have to go back to, you were talking about, the difference between elementary school and middle school and high school and college. And I'm sitting in all of it right now because Roman is in first grade. Malia is in middle school, and I felt everything that you said. Elias is often in college, if you can believe it, right? Because he was this, anyways. And Oriana's a teacher inside the high school. So all of those experiences that I'm carrying with me right now, and thinking about how the different ways that it shows up for different parents, either because of the grade their children are in or because of where they live. But also, if we can talk really quick, like 1 minute, about children with disabilities, the role of the 504 or the IEP, because my baby does have an IEP, and the challenges that we all very much face, and what that looks like in the fight for education, especially for our Black and Brown students.
The unfortunate thing I will say is that you have to fight for your kid to get what they need and are required to get. And I mean that sincerely. And when you're like, I don't know what to do, I what I have found is the best network is parents. Parents supporting parents have been best. And there's some legal services that are really great that have been asking that can support parents in this. But the reality is you have to hold your school accountable to find the right solutions for your child. And sometimes the teacher just doesn't know. I'll be honest. One of my first year teachings, I had a student who had an IEP, and we struggled. And we tried this, and this didn't work, and we tried something else, and it didn't work. And it took us a minute to find a thing and a system that worked for him. And finally, he was good, and he was like, ended up being like one of my favorite students. But it took time, and so I think you have to have a collaborative relationship with the school. The school has to be a willing partner. And sometimes you got to fight the school and be like, is my kid getting everything that their IEP says they're supposed to have? Like, and even getting the IEP can be a challenge. I'm like, just to be honest. And I apologize. I almost want to apologize on behalf of the system because it is, but you have to fight tooth and nail and don't give up because our kids are not disposable. And yes, it takes longer to find what works. It takes longer to find the right combination of things and like reward systems. And I reward, and I'm saying it again, reward systems work way over punishment. Like what ends up working for my IEP kid, that was like, he had like a one-on-one power with him. And what worked was like a sticker thing on his desk and a notebook that we wrote to his mom at the end of every day. And we were like, we're gonna write in your notebooks that your mom. And he was like, let me. And also, like, I didn't have to tell his mom every time he did something slightly disruptive. It was like we reserved that for like the most extreme things, the slightly disruptive we can handle. And so it really takes a partnership with the classroom. I think the other part is like sometimes parents, if you're going through something, tell the school because kids don't process change well. And so, like, work with the school, work together. And that's really the only way to get to a collaborative solution. But sometimes when the school is not doing its part, you got to fight and you got to demand you get everything you're deserved and required by law. And that's the one thing, the law is on your side, but if they can get away with not giving you the extra thing because it costs too much, because it's uncomfortable or it takes too much work for them to do it, they will get out of it. You have to be the fiercest advocate. And unfortunately, there's such a racial bias behind that. I want to be honest, like what we deal with in our system, that if you're a white parent and you come into a school complaining, schools bend. They're like, oh, whoa, we gotta fix this. We can't have this. And when you're a black parent and you come to school complaining, they're like, oh my gosh, this angry parent can't come in here and they want to bar you. You gotta fight for your rights and for your child to get what they need. And you gotta force the system to do what it's supposed to do. And it's hard. And that's why I say like the best support system is other parents who've done it because they can tell you how to best navigate that system. But unfortunately is unnecessarily hard for parents.
And if you are a parent or a guardian in the greater capital region and you need assistance with direct one-to-one advocacy support, you can reach out to all of us at untitledandfree@gmail.com. Probably the largest amount of work that I do in my day to day is working with parents who don't know who to call, don't know what their rights are. They were told that their child has to have this thing and can't have that thing. And we are able to support you and walk you through that so you do know what your rights are. And with that, if you have other questions about all of us, please reach out to untitledandfree@gmail.com. You also can follow us on all social media platforms at untitledandfree.com. Jasmine, if you could say to folks, what are the websites for both AQE and working families?
Yeah, AQE is my family, y'all. AQENY.org, Alliance for Quality Education, statewide advocacy group, doing amazing work. Parents, they are a C4, they do lobbying, really important to plug into groups that are able to do that. And Working Families Party, so workingfamilies.org. We have a Capital District chapter where we have local folks who are leading. Reach out to us. I will put my email in the chat and I will connect you to the leader of the Working Families Party in the Capital District so that you all can be connected. But yes, build power with us.
And if you're looking for the co-chair of the Schenectady County chapter, you're talking to her right now. But there's like a lot of us wear a lot of different hats, and we do so because we need more of us engaged and involved. It's why it's important for us to have these conversations on all of these different issues, especially around education, something that I've been passionate about now for more than 25 years, and something that many of us know intimately. I really want to give a special thank you to Jasmine for being here today. I am proud to call you my friend. I'm glad that I got to meet you 12 years ago and learn what I didn't know, right? Because folks are like, oh, Jamaica knows everything about education. I don't know everything about education. I just know a hell of a lot more than I did 12 years ago. That is in part because of Jasmine, because of Alliance for Quality Education, because folks were willing to have a conversation with me and share information with me. We will be back next Tuesday to have another conversation about politics, about representation. But before we close out, please everyone give the flowers to Jasmine right now. Throw up your little emojis, your hearts, your hands, your claps, all the things. We appreciate you being here. Are there any last words that you want to leave us tonight?
Yes. Congratulations to all of us and your anniversary. I love watching Jamaica build. I remember when you announced you're running for school board, and we were like, finally. So want to give you your flowers for stepping in to this role of leadership, because if it wasn't for you, there would be such a huge gap in the capital region, especially in Schenectady. So you are doing God's work. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me into this space with you. I am honored. And to the folks who are here, thank you for listening. Thank you for wanting to be engaged and plug in. I just want to remind folks that we think about civic engagement as voting. Election day is just the fraction of it. Like, yes, we got to go vote. Y'all, we got to go vote. Even we don't like their candidates, we got to go vote. But the other part of that is after we vote, we got to hold everybody accountable. And we're like, we voted for you. This is what we want. And they got to hear from us on a regular basis. And again, we do that in community. We do that together with our local groups. And so plug in where you can, find your political home, your political community, and you can have more than one. And follow us on the socials. I think that's really important. So we show up on your timelines. So you can see the fights we're engaging in and how we're trying to win and build power. And we only win when we build power together. And so let's build a bigger we, invite friends and family next time. So more of us can be here for this dynamic conversations and conversations like this. So thank you, Jamaica.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. Thank you, everyone that joined us tonight for this conversation. Like I said, we're back next Tuesday, and we look forward to seeing many of you there. Everyone, have a safe